Hi everyone, welcome to this course called Designing and Running an Experiment on MATLAB with Psychtoolbox. My name is Nicola Binetti. I've been running this course now, I think it's the third year, generally at UCL. This is going to be, however, the first time that I'm running this on an online platform, but hopefully things will go smoothly. So let's start off by talking about what we'll cover in this lesson and in the following ones, just so you know what to expect. So we're going to start off by talking about MATLAB, just so we get familiar with the layout of the program and some basic concepts, such as variables, indexing, scripting. We're then going to talk about Psychtoolbox. Psychtoolbox is essentially a toolbox which expands the functionality of MATLAB. It permits us to do more things with it, or more specifically things that are related to constructing experiments, where we present stimuli, visual stimuli or auditory stimuli, we collect responses, and so forth. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to install it, and how to get started in terms of understanding how to use it. So where to look up for information, or where, for example, to pick apart little programs, which are demo programs, that are actually contained inside the Psychtoolbox folder. The thing we're going to do after that is we're actually going to try to use this information to build our own experiment. So this is an experiment, it's going to be a very simple experiment that then you can run on yourself, in which you're going to, for example, request participant information of, for example, the name, the gender, the age of whoever's running the experiment. We're going to display some stimuli, which are going to be some still frames taken from an actor's face. We're going to loop through trials, so we're going to be doing something recursively where we're going to present some stimuli and request a response by the participant. And finally, we're going to log and save the data. Alright, so first things first, what is it that we're going to need? Well, we're going to need MATLAB, which supposedly you should already have installed on your system. You should also have Psychtoolbox. Assuming you don't have it, this is where you would get it. Here's the website. Here are some system requirements, just in case. These are, however, all documented on the website as well, but I assume you all have a newer version of MATLAB than this. Now, we're also going to be providing you with some files, which basically consist in sample scripts, basically little scripts that encapsulate functionality of different aspects of the experiment. For example, scripts just for displaying visual stimuli, or a script just for collecting responses. We're going to provide also a script which is actually the whole experiment script, so a script that runs the full experiment, which would be the end result of the whole course. And we're also providing some image stimuli, which we'll be actually displaying. Now, I mean, you could either just follow, what you see on the screen by just opening the scripts when I start talking about them, or you can actually, type in your own scripts, just step by step, just following what I do, which I think would be the preferable method, just so you sort of get a more hands-on approach to the whole thing. All right, so first things first, we have to download Psychtoolbox, assuming you haven't done so. We're going to have to add it to the MATLAB path and check that everything's properly functioning. So, as I said, I'm assuming that you guys already have Psychtoolbox. If not, grab it at this URL over here. Okay. Then add to path. So add to path. So I'm just going to change window here so you can see my MATLAB install here. And basically in MATLAB, we have a little button up here under the Home tab that's called Set Path. All right. Now, Set Path, basically we would be telling MATLAB where to grab the folder that contains all the Psychtoolbox functions. So the way we would do that, we would just click on Add with Subfolders. Okay. We would be looking for the folder where we saved the Psychtoolbox functions. In my case, I just plugged them in here, and then I would just select folder. Okay. Now I'm not going to do it because I already have it installed, so I'm not going to add it again. But you should technically see it then appear within your path. Okay. So I have it over here. Now, just one small recommendation. In case you, for example, end up having your first attempt when you try running a demo, which we'll be doing in just a little while, if the program just happens to crash for some unexplainable reason, come and check over here that this folder here, okay, so the one that says psychbasic/MATLAB Windows files, comes before this folder. Okay, just psychbasic. So this one has to come before. If it's not, you can just move up or down. So just make sure that it's before. Okay. So basically, by adding it to the path, MATLAB knows where to look for the functions that we're going to be calling when we work with Psychtoolbox. All right. So check that it's properly installed. So for example, let's just do that. Let's just write help Psychtoolbox. So I managed to run this successfully, so I just know that Psychtoolbox is there, and I know that MATLAB can access it, so I've correctly set the path. All right, so let's start off by just talking more generically about MATLAB. So the first recommendation I'm going to give you is to grab a hold of this file, of this PDF file. Okay, this is called MATLAB for Psychologists. It is, I think, an essential starting place. It's basically going to cover all primary ingredients required to build the majority of experiments that you're going to, that you might come across in psychology, in cognitive sciences in general. Or, for example, it's going to cover all the basics that you're going to need for analyzing data, for plotting data. It's an essential tool. This is actually where I started many years ago. So definitely go there. It takes a couple of hours, maybe to go through it, maybe 4 or 5 hours, I don't know. So you can get over in one afternoon. It provides examples. It requires you to do a little test. Well, it gives you some little tests to do. You can do it maybe a couple of afternoons. It's really gonna be very helpful then to understand better all the things we're talking about for the demo, of course. So things that are gonna be covered, for example, are variables. Okay, so we can just quickly have a look at that. So I'm gonna go now into MATLAB. So MATLAB generally is divided. The windows might look slightly different on your system, but you can actually move them around. So there's some degree of can be customized to some extent. So variables. So variables basically means that when I'm using MATLAB, I can, for example, provide MATLAB with, for example, I could create a variable, let's call it A, and I could tell MATLAB to store something in that variable, for example, a number. A is equal to 1. All right? I might create another variable called B, and I could store another number. For example, B is equal to 2. Okay, so I have 2 variables. Now, when you're creating variables, you're going to see them appear in the workspace area over here. It's basically telling you what's in my workspace. There are 2 variables, right? One is called A, one is called B, and they have 2 different contents. One has a number 1, one has a number 2. So this is generally what you call a scalar. So it's basically think of it like a box. It's a variable which is like a box. You open the box and inside you store something, just one element. Alright, another thing you could do, however, is you could store several elements. Alright, and this is something that you would call an array or vector. Okay, so scalars, one element, vectors, more than one element. So think of it like a drawer or like a shelf, where you have several different, well, think of it like a chest with several different shelves, alright, which might be, for example, horizontally arranged. So, for example, I could create a vector or an array, which is called C, and I can plug some numbers into it. So in this case, I'm going to use the square brackets, and for example, I'm going to write 1, 2, 3. So I'm using commas to separate, let's say, the different shelves. Okay. If I press Enter, MATLAB tells me that I have a variable. It's called C, and it contains 3 elements, 1, 2, and 3. And as you can see, they're horizontally arranged. I might have another one in which I want to arrange things vertically, for example. So it would be very similar. I would still require my square brackets, but this time I'm going to be separating my numbers with semicolons, like that. Okay? So scalars, A and B, vectors, C and D. Another type of variable that I have are matrices, okay? Which is basically, imagine it just like, a shelf with drawers that are both horizontal and vertical. So for example, I could have E is equal to 1, 2, 3. So these are the things on the first row. A semicolon to separate to now provide things on the second row. 4, 5, 6. Right? And that's a matrix. Okay. So, right, strings. So in all these examples of that I provided you of scalars, A and B, vectors, C and D, and a matrix, E, I've essentially plugged in numbers. Another thing that I could, for example, store inside a variable is text. Now that's the shorthand generally is, they're generally called strings in programming in general, programming languages in general. Basically, for example, I might have a variable that's called T, and I can store a string of text inside. And the way you specify that is by using apices over here, and I can just type in some text like that. Okay, so now I have a variable, T, that contains a string of text called text. Okay, now, which says text. Obviously, so even if I wrote a number, just so I want to point out this. Now, it's telling me that T is equal to 1, but don't get confused, this is not a number, this is actually text, so I can't do math on it. Okay, I can't sum it to some other number and expect to get, for example, if I do T plus 1, I'm not going to get, what I would expect. I get something like 50. So it's text, it's not a number. All right. So another concept that's covered, and it's very, very important, it's one of the cornerstones of MATLAB, is indexing. Indexing basically is the way through which you pull out values stored inside a variable in MATLAB, or you plug in new values inside a variable. So what does that mean? So I'm going to type CLC, which basically means clear the command window. It's just a way of getting rid of all the text that I've accumulated there. Okay, important thing, by doing CLC, I didn't erase my variables, I just cleared my command window. My variables are all still there. Okay, so if I write A, I can still see it. All right. Okay, where was I? Right, indexing. So we created vectors, for example. So we have a vector that's called C, right? And C contains 3 elements, 1, 2, and 3. With indexing, basically what I can do is I can instruct MATLAB to specifically give me one element that's stored in one specific location. So for example, I could ask MATLAB that I want C, but what's contained in the second shelf. And it's going to tell me 2. Okay? So by doing this, I told MATLAB, take the variable C, which is an array, and tell me what's in the second location. Now, it's important that it just happens to be a coincidence that the location is the same as the actual content. But if I do that with D, okay, so D was 4, 5, and 6, and I ask for the second location of D, I'm going to get 5, okay, because it's the second element in D, second location, okay? Okay, other things that are going to be covered, that are covered in this PDF over here, relate to flow control. This is another basic element of programming. It's the way through which you instruct programs to, for example, do different things based on conditions. Or for example, and that's generally done through what are called if-then statements. Or for example, you can have the program recursively do something. For example, repeat, for example, a trial as many times as required throughout a block. So these are basic elements used in programming. There's going to be plenty of examples in the scripts when we get there, so don't worry yet. Other things that are covered are like just basic MATLAB instructions that you use, for example, to clear the command window, or for example, which I already showed you, or for example, to request, ask MATLAB what variables are currently inside the workspace, or for example, to clear the workspace so I have a clean slate, erase all my variables. All right. So this is something that I really can't stress enough. This is very important. Try to go over this document at least a couple of times if you really want to get comfortable with the basics of MATLAB. So then, as I said, obviously what we're doing is we're expanding MATLAB by installing a toolbox on top of it, which is Psychtoolbox. Now, in Psychtoolbox, well, one thing we can do is we already typed help Psychtoolbox just to see that it was installed, but we can actually go a step further and see, what is it that we have here at our disposal. So help Psychtoolbox, there's all sorts of basic information on how to use it, but it's, it's not the most user-friendly, I find. However, if you're going to notice that here there's a list of things, that are actually quite useful, especially this one here that's called Psych Demos, and show how to use Psychtoolbox. That sounds promising. Okay, so if actually I click on it, I'm going to get a whole list of demos that, let's say, illustrate some basic functionality of the program. Which might be things like presenting, some very simple stimuli, like, draw some text, or I don't know, other interesting things like bubble demo, okay, which basically, draws, I think stimuli on the screen that just move randomly. I think it was that one, and things of that sort. So basically, when you want to get a feel of what Psychtoolbox can do, okay, so the basic things, like what can it draw, what can you draw, how can you do it, how can you make it work, this is the good place to start looking, okay, just the demos, okay. So we could actually have a look at one. So why don't we have a look at this one here, draw some text demo, okay. So let's try to open it. So I'm just going to copy the name, okay, and I'm going to go here and I'm going to write open, and I'm going to write, and I'm just going to copy, I'm going to paste draw some text demo. Okay, it takes me here. So what happened here is that I opened the editor. Now the editor is where you actually write programs. So I'm going to go more into detail of this in the future. Bottom line is, here we have a basic description of what this does. Okay, well, not much here, but anyway, there's all sorts of instructions that are related to drawing text. Okay, so we can run this, and just to see what happens by pressing on the run button. So I'm going to press here. It opens a window, and it draws some text. Okay, so if I want to understand what was required in order to display these things on a screen, I can just have a look here, and I can sort of try to work out step by step what's going on. Okay, so we saw an example of a script. This is a script. Draw some text is a script. Okay, it's basically doing some things. Something rather simple, but it could be something extremely complex as long as I keep on typing new and new instructions. So what is a script? Basically, a script is a set of instructions that are executed sequentially at the press of a button. So by sequentially, we basically mean that in the command window, if you think about it, we've been already instructing MATLAB on some things. I'll just clear the command window. For example, we used, within the command window, we, for example, created some variables. We created A. We created B, right? We did some maths with them, Okay. And these things I've done step by step. Now, when I'm using the editor over here, basically what I'm doing, I'm doing the same thing that I would be doing in the command window, just that instead of writing and typing instructions one at a time and pressing enter after each time, basically I just write them now down, and when I press run, MATLAB is just going to go through them sequentially. It's going to go line by line and execute whatever is on that line. Okay, so that's far more convenient. Okay, so it's as I was saying, it's in principle identical to typing instructions manually, one by one. So instead here what you're doing is that you write and your instructions that will systematically yield the same outcome. So basically every time I press that button, I'm going to get the same output. Okay. Okay, so let's think about what we want in terms of creating a script. So when we're typically, most of you are probably interested in this because at some stage you're going to have a experiment to run for a master thesis, for example, where you're going to have to collect data on some of your colleagues or your friends. And you're going to have to analyze that data. Those are two typical instances in which you're going to need some familiarity with MATLAB and ideally some toolbox that is actually competent for running psychophysical psychology experiment. So your first thing is to define your goal. Okay. And break it down into a set of sub-goals. Okay, so what does that basically mean? It basically means that when you're thinking about an experiment, it's going to be something that at the beginning is quite nebulous. You're going to have some idea of a task. But obviously then you're going to find yourself in front of the editor and you just don't know where to start from, because you have no prior experience. So what you have to start thinking of, okay, is what does my experiment actually consist in? What are the basic ingredients that are required for it? You don't need to know. You literally just have to verbalize this. It doesn't really matter that you know the minutia. It's basically saying, okay, well, does my experiment involve stimuli? What type of stimuli? Is it text? Are these pictures? Are these videos? Okay. Do I require participants to respond? How do they respond? Do they respond with a keyboard? Do they respond with a mouse? Do they respond, with their voice? Okay. Do I need trials? How many trials do I need? So you sort of have to think of just writing down literally a laundry list of elements that you need, that you think you're going to need to run your experiment. Then what you're basically doing is you try to tackle them one by one. So you don't start by building your experiment from scratch. You start by identifying the ingredients, the basic ingredients of your experiments, and tackling them one step at a time. Okay? So you first are going to write a script that is just about, for example, presenting one stimulus. Or for example, you could write a script that is just going to collect a response and it's going to log it. So that's kind of the approach that you want to think about. So it's sort of like an inverted funnel, if you think about it. All right, so another thing so that's definitely one thing you want to do. So you want to think of your problem and break it down into pieces. The other thing you want to do is to go over scripts that have been created by others. Okay, so you have sample scripts in Psychtoolbox folder, like in the demos that I just showed you. So if you just go through the list of the demos. So let's bring that back up. This what it is, like demos over here. Okay, I have a generous amount of examples here, and this is a pretty good place to start because some stuff is going to be, for example, about drawing some geometric shapes. So, for example, arc demo. Okay, it's going to draw essentially arcs, I guess. There's text. So we saw an example, for example, text. Okay. Perhaps there's other stuff related, for example, to audio. There's stuff related, for example, to tracking a mouse. Okay. So this is the first place I would look. But consider also that when you're generally assigned to build an experiment, many times it's a standard paradigm. So for example, it could be a Posner task, which is a typical attention task, or a prior entry task, or a flash suppression task. So many times when you're in the fortunate condition of basically running a well-established paradigm, just look up online for examples and you're bound to find many examples that you can then just use straight out of the box, or you might just tinker to see how exactly they got their thing working, and then you can just modify the lines to suit your own purposes. So just last thing about this, about scripting, let's say philosophy, is that it's really all about creativity. Meaning that you might have the idea let's say you all might, as in this example, might have to build a experiment, which is, let's say, a paradigm that does one very specific thing. But it might be that each person writing that program that produces that will write a completely different program. So there's really an infinite number of ways to really produce the same thing. But bear in mind that there are some ways that are better than others. And by better, we basically mean that they require less lines to write, and for example, that they're less computationally demanding for the machine to execute. Okay, so that's pretty much everything for now. So what we're going to be doing in the next session is that we're going to start creating a script that runs a very simple psychology experiment. So see you in a bit.